Hey guys, tonight, let's drift together into a quiet story from the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a moment before time froze in history. This one feels calm, slow, and strangely peaceful. You'll hear the rhythm of the waves, the gentle hum of the engines, and somewhere far away, the soft crackle of a campfire. So, settle in, let the lights dim, and let this story wrap around you like a blanket. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe it's late where you are, maybe past midnight. What time is it there? Before we move on, if you enjoy calm, sleepy history stories like this one, you can press the like button or subscribe. No rush. You can do it later, maybe after you've drifted into sleep. Now, imagine the night before the iceberg, the Titanic cutting through the dark ocean. The air is cold, crisp, and the sea is still like polished glass. Above, the stars shimmer like scattered frost. The ship's lights glow faintly in the mist, and every sound, every creak, every echo, feels like it's holding its breath. The crew moves quietly through the narrow corridors, boots on wooden floors. The faint murmur of laughter from the dining area. Someone yawns, another stifles a cough. Nothing feels out of place. Everything feels ordinary, even perfect. That's what makes this hour so haunting, because no one knew what waited just beyond the horizon. If you listen closely, you might almost hear the sound of their footsteps, the soft hum of the engines below, the steady heartbeat of a giant ship that believed nothing could stop it. The Titanic was a masterpiece of human ambition, elegant, enormous, confident. But in these quiet hours, it felt more like a floating city fast asleep. There's something strangely comforting about this kind of calm. It's the kind of stillness that exists before history shifts. Like the world pausing, just for a breath, before everything changes. The men on duty kept their routines, polished brass, checked clocks, wrote notes. All normal things, done one last time without knowing it. A few crewmen leaned over the rails, letting the cold wind sting their faces awake. They talked softly about home, about family, plans, and the warm sun they missed. Somewhere deep below, others worked by furnace light, muscles sore but steady. They weren't heroes or villains, just people, doing their best in the final quiet of the world they knew. Take a slow breath. You're safe here, listening from far away. Let the gentle rhythm of their movements help your mind settle. This isn't a story of panic or noise. It's a story of calm before the storm. And calm can be beautiful, even when it hides what's coming next. The ocean itself was silent, almost kind. No waves, no warning. Just a stillness so deep that it could make you forget where the sea ended and the sky began. The lookout above leaned forward into the wind, his gloved hands tight on the rail. He could see forever, or so he thought. Every life on board, every sound in that sleeping ship, was part of one long, quiet heartbeat. The kind of moment that only history remembers after it's gone. And as you listen, as the story drifts forward, let that same stillness help you slow down, release the day, and rest your mind for the night ahead. Before we continue, take a gentle breath. You're doing well. This is your moment to unwind. We'll stay in this peaceful rhythm a little longer, where the night is endless, and the ship still believes it will reach the morning. The crew didn't know they were living their final ordinary hours. To them, it was just another night shift, the rhythm of work and quiet conversations, the comfort of routine. Down below, the stokers kept feeding the engines, their shovels scraping against coal, a steady rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat through the metal hull. Each sound was a sign of life, a pattern that said everything was still fine. Above deck, the night air was biting cold. Some of the officers pulled their coats tighter, their breath turning white under the starlight. There was no moon that night, only a deep black sky and stars so sharp they looked close enough to touch. A few sailors said it was the clearest night they'd ever seen. None of them knew that clarity can sometimes hide danger. Every few minutes, someone checked the time, another noted the speed. The ship felt unstoppable, a creation so mighty it seemed untouchable. But in that stillness, you could sense something else, a quiet warning only nature could whisper. The ocean, calm as glass, reflected the stars like a mirror. It looked beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that comes before silence. Take another slow breath. Let that image stay with you, the ship, vast and shining, gliding through the darkness. You can almost hear the soft hum of its engines, the faint ring of a distant bell, and the quiet murmur of voices fading into the night. It's peaceful, isn't it? Peaceful in a way that makes you feel both small and safe. One deck below, a young steward leaned against a wall, eyes half closed, thinking about home. His shift would end soon. Maybe he'd get a warm drink, maybe a short nap before dawn. Simple plans, small hopes, the things that make us human. None of them dramatic, but all of them real. Farther down the corridor, two men laughed quietly about something small. A letter, a joke, a shared memory. In moments like these, history isn't about tragedy or heroism. It's about the little details that make a night feel alive. The kind of things that fade when morning never comes. A soft reminder, you're doing great. Let your breathing slow with the rhythm of this story. Each word is like a step across the deck, steady and calm. The goal isn't to reach the end quickly. It's to walk slowly through the quiet before everything changes. Now picture the ocean again, stretching endlessly in every direction. No sound of waves, no crash of water, just the whisper of cold air brushing against the steel of the ship. Somewhere out there, in that black horizon, a mountain of ice drifted silently closer. But the crew couldn't see it. The stars were too bright, and the sea too still. Inside the bridge, the officers exchanged quiet words. They were calm, precise, confident. Instruments glowed faintly in the dim light. The captain was asleep, trusting his crew to guide the ship safely through the night. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt wrong. Sometimes history moves quietly, like the ticking of a clock no one hears until it stops. And as we leave this part of the story, keep the feeling of that calm inside you, the quiet before the ice, the hum before the silence. Let it settle over your thoughts like a warm blanket. You're safe, you're here, and the night is yours to rest. Drift deeper into stillness, and we'll continue the story soon, gently, in the next part of this long, sleepy voyage. The night carried on quietly, the kind of calm that feels endless at sea. For the crew of the Titanic, it was just another shift, another set of hours spent in the rhythm of their duties. Every movement had purpose, every sound told its own small story. Down below, the engines beat like a steady drum, deep, slow, alive. The great ship breathed through them. In the boiler rooms, the heat was heavy and constant. Dozens of stokers worked in near silence, faces glowing orange in the furnace light. Each shovel of coal sent a shower of sparks into the air before vanishing into the roar of fire. Sweat ran down their faces, but they kept their pace, steady and sure. The work was exhausting, but familiar, the kind of effort that keeps the world turning, unseen by those above. Far above them, the atmosphere was entirely different. In the first-class corridors, the air was cool and faintly perfumed. Stewards walked softly, checking linens, polishing brass, straightening chairs in quiet anticipation of morning. They didn't rush. Their movements were calm, practiced, part of a nightly ritual that made everything feel normal. Everywhere on the ship, from the lowest deck to the captain's bridge, there was order, a kind of peaceful rhythm that only a well-trained crew could create. Someone hummed a tune softly as he swept a passageway. Another counted inventory, pausing now and then to listen to the faint vibration underfoot. It was the sound of confidence, the kind born from repetition and trust. Outside, the sea was so smooth it felt unreal. No waves slapped against the hull, no wind howled across the deck. Just stillness, the kind of stillness that makes your thoughts drift inward. Some crew members, during short breaks, leaned over the railings and looked into the black water below. It was too dark to see the ocean, but the stars reflected faintly, giving the illusion that the ship floated among them. Time moved gently that night. No one hurried, no one panicked. The work continued like a soft lullaby. Coal, fire, polish, walk, check, repeat. Above the hum of machinery, there was a kind of music in it all, the steady rhythm of people simply doing their jobs. And in that small harmony, they felt safe. Take a breath with them. The same slow rhythm that filled the ship also fills this story. It's easy to imagine the warmth of the furnace, the cool air of the deck, and the quiet glow of the lamps flickering down long hallways. The sound of the sea was distant, almost polite. Everything was still under control. In the mailroom, a few men sorted letters, stacking envelopes in careful rows. They joked softly, wondering where those messages would end up once they reached New York. Their laughter was low and genuine, not knowing that those letters would one day be pulled from the ocean, words meant for a tomorrow that never came. But for them, that moment was just another night's work. A soft hum carried through the lower decks, a mix of machinery and muffled voices. The vibration was steady, hypnotic, like a heartbeat beneath the feet of everyone aboard. If you stood still long enough, it could almost lull you to sleep. The gentle sway, the warmth, the repetition. It felt safe, predictable, almost eternal. And somewhere near the galley, a cook leaned against the counter, cleaning his hands and smiling faintly. He looked at the clock, just past 11:30. Soon, he would rest, and others would take his place. The routine never stopped, not even for the night sky or the endless sea. It was a world that ran on rhythm, not fate, and in that rhythm, peace lived quietly, just for a little while longer. Up on the bridge, the officers exchanged quiet words while checking their instruments. Their voices were calm, their expressions steady. The compass glowed faintly, the clock ticked softly, and the faint hum of electricity filled the silence. Every detail mattered: the angle of the helm, the reading of the stars, the speed of the ship cutting through invisible waves. Nothing felt out of place. Far below, the stokers paused for a brief moment to wipe the sweat from their brows. The air around them shimmered with heat, glowing like the inside of a forge. One of them smiled and said it was strange how you could be surrounded by fire deep below, while only a few decks above, the air was freezing cold. It was like two worlds coexisting, both part of the same great machine. In the middle decks, a few stewards shared a late-night cup of tea, whispering so they wouldn't disturb the passengers. The smell of coal dust mixed faintly with the scent of bread and soap. They talked about ordinary things, what they would do when they reached New York, how long the next voyage might be. Their voices were soft, as if they were talking to the night itself. The routine made time disappear. No one thought about the hours or the distance behind them. The ocean stretched endlessly outside, black and silent. Inside, the light was warm and golden. You could walk from one end of the ship to the other and feel as though the world existed only there. The Titanic, its crew, and the dark sea holding it gently in place. Take a slow breath. The rhythm of their work is the same rhythm you feel now. Steady, measured, unhurried. In every task, there's calmness. In every quiet conversation, there's peace. History often hides in these small, unnoticed moments, the ones that happen before the story everyone remembers. In the linen room, someone folded towels neatly into perfect squares. In the wireless room, faint signals flickered through the static. A few messages from nearby ships passed by, nothing urgent, just chatter between sailors. The operators smiled, unaware that those same radios would soon carry cries for help into the empty night. Up on deck, two sailors leaned against the rail, watching their breath turn to mist. The stars seemed endless, brighter than any they had ever seen. One of them said it felt like the sky was closer here, as if the ship were sailing through it. The other nodded quietly. Neither of them spoke again for a long while, just listening to the steady sound of the ocean sliding past the hull. A soft reminder drifts through the silence. Everything is still calm. The night remains unbroken. You can almost hear the slow footsteps on the deck, the distant hum below, the heartbeat of the ship continuing through the hours. This was their world, and in its rhythm, they found something that felt like peace. In the galley, the last pots were cleaned, the last utensils stored away. A single lantern flickered as the cook stepped out, leaving the room quiet and still. The air smelled faintly of baked bread and metal. Somewhere far below, the furnaces continued to burn, and the great ship continued its steady path through the sleeping ocean. And as the clock neared midnight, nothing seemed out of place. The ship glided smoothly, its lights soft against the black sea. Inside, the crew went about their work as they always had, unaware that each ordinary task, each small motion, each soft breath, was part of the final calm before history changed forever. High above the main deck, in the coldest part of the night, 2 watchmen stood in the crow's nest of the Titanic. Their breath turned into soft clouds as they scanned the horizon. The wind brushed against their coats, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of salt and iron. Up there, the world felt weightless, a quiet space between sea and sky, where only the hum of the ship reached their ears. The stars were brilliant that night, so many that the sky looked almost alive, scattered with light that shimmered across the still water. The ocean was too calm, almost unnaturally flat, and it reflected every star like a mirror. One of the lookouts whispered that it felt as if they were sailing through the heavens instead of the sea. The other smiled faintly but said nothing, keeping his eyes fixed forward. Below them, the Titanic stretched endlessly, a glowing spine of light and movement. You could see faint silhouettes of people walking the decks, small compared to the vastness of the ship. It was peaceful, a quiet kind of peace that can make you forget how fragile everything truly is. The sound of the sea was low and rhythmic, like the slow inhale and exhale of something enormous. The lookouts had been there for hours, changing shifts in the freezing cold. Their job was simple but heavy with responsibility, to spot anything ahead before it was too late. With only the stars above and the black ocean below, their world shrank to a narrow field of view, framed by shadows and stillness. Each passing minute stretched long, carried only by the steady ticking of the clock inside their heads. One of them rubbed his hands together to keep warm, the leather of his gloves stiff with frost. He blinked against the sting of the wind, trying to stay alert. There was no moon that night, only starlight. Without the glow of a full moon, the sea blended with the horizon, turning everything into a single, endless shade of darkness. It was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Take a breath with them. Feel the cold air, the steady sway of the ship beneath your feet. Imagine that deep silence. No music, no engines here, only the faint sound of the ocean gliding past the hull. Even in the heart of human invention, nature ruled the night. Its vastness surrounded the Titanic like a quiet warning no one could hear. From time to time, one of the watchmen would speak, their voices low so as not to startle the other. "Clear night," one might say. "Aye, too clear," the other would reply. And then silence again, that heavy kind of silence that fills your ears until even your own heartbeat feels too loud. Far below, the lights from the bridge flickered faintly, figures moving with quiet purpose. The ship's officers were confident. The charts were clear, the weather perfect. The night seemed safe. Yet up here, above the warmth and light, the air carried something else, an unease too soft to name. The lookouts kept scanning, eyes tracing the horizon again and again, searching for anything that broke the perfect line of sea and sky. Hours passed. Nothing changed. Just stars, stillness, and the distant hum of the ship pressing forward through the darkness. And as you picture this moment, let yourself drift into the rhythm of it, the quiet, the patience, the fragile calm. Every sound up there was small, a breath, a shift of boots, the faint creak of the crow's nest. In a world so vast, they were just 2 men alone in the cold, keeping watch while the rest of the ship dreamed below. The night seemed endless, a canvas of silence stretching far beyond sight. The lookouts could hear only the faint hiss of wind across their ears and the slow groan of the ship's steel frame adjusting to the cold. Every few minutes, one of them would tap the rail, a small sound to keep himself awake. The air was so sharp it felt like it could cut through breath itself. Yet even in that discomfort, there was beauty, the kind of stillness that feels ancient, the kind that humbles you without words. Somewhere below, a clock chimed softly. The sound drifted upward through layers of metal and air until it reached the crow's nest, distant but comforting. It reminded them that time was still moving, even when the world around them seemed frozen. They shifted their weight from one foot to the other, keeping rhythm with the unseen heartbeat of the ship, slow, steady, unaware of what waited ahead. Inside the bridge, the officers continued their quiet routine. Murdoch stood near the helm, eyes steady, glancing occasionally at the compass and the horizon. The wireless operator's faint signals buzzed from a nearby cabin, short messages, unimportant chatter between ships. There was no urgency, no reason to worry. If anything, the crew felt a strange kind of peace. It was, after all, a night that seemed too perfect to be real. Back in the crow's nest, one of the men rubbed his eyes, blinking against the starlight. His breath misted in the air, and his gloves were stiff from the cold. He leaned forward, squinting into the distance. The sea was so flat it almost seemed solid. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" he muttered. His partner nodded, barely moving his lips. "Aye. Feels too quiet." They said nothing else after that. Sometimes silence said more. Take a moment here. Breathe in the stillness they felt. The slow rhythm of the ship moving forward through endless black water. The cold, the patience, the focus. It's a reminder that calm often hides behind noise, that even in the hardest work, there can be moments of complete peace. Let that feeling rest in your chest, steady and soft, like the faint pulse of the ocean. Below them, the great ship glided forward, cutting through the sea with effortless grace. The lights along its deck shimmered faintly, and from far above, it looked like a moving constellation, a star drifting across the Atlantic. The lookouts could see it all, the glow, the movement, the life below. Yet from their post, it all felt distant, like watching another world from the edge of the sky. A soft reminder drifts in, everything still feels calm. The story moves slowly, like the ship itself, unhurried and sure. You can almost feel the chill of that night air brushing against your face, hear the creak of wood beneath boots, sense the endless black water stretching beyond sight. For now, there is nothing to fear, only the steady forward motion of time. Inside the lookout's chest, his heart beat a little faster. Maybe it was the cold, maybe something else. He lifted his binoculars again, tracing the stars across the horizon. The ocean ahead was empty, or at least, it looked that way. He exhaled slowly, lowering the glass, letting the night blur back into one smooth field of darkness. He told himself everything was fine. And for a moment, he believed it. The ship pressed on, steady and certain. Behind the walls of the bridge, soft conversations continued, laughter whispered between shifts, boots clicking on metal floors. Routine carried them forward like a lullaby. No one realized how close history was to changing. The sea around them looked peaceful, too peaceful to question. And high above, the watchmen stayed at their post, quiet and patient, eyes searching the distance. Their breath rose into the night, fading quickly in the wind. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed different. Just stars, silence, and the endless dark ahead. The kind of calm that makes you forget how fragile even the strongest ship can be. On the bridge of the Titanic, the air was cool and steady. The lamps cast a soft golden glow across polished brass and smooth wood, and the faint hum of machinery beneath their feet was like a heartbeat, constant and comforting. Every man knew his task, and every movement was quiet, deliberate. It was the kind of night that made even time itself seem to slow down, stretching thin across the endless Atlantic. First Officer Murdoch stood near the starboard window, his hands clasped behind his back. He glanced from the compass to the horizon, watching the line where sea met sky disappear into shadow. His breath fogged the glass for a moment, then vanished. The sound of the engines below vibrated gently through the floor, steady, unwavering. There was no storm, no wind, not even a wave strong enough to break the rhythm. Everything about the night whispered, safe, calm, unshakable. The bridge crew spoke little. Commands were given softly, answered with a nod or a quiet eye. Every sound carried in the stillness, the faint click of a telegraph, the shuffle of boots, the creak of the wooden panels expanding in the cold. In a way, the silence was its own kind of music. It filled the air with something that felt orderly, balanced, human. These men were at the center of a masterpiece of precision, and they trusted it completely. Through the windows, the ocean gleamed under starlight. Without waves, it looked like a vast sheet of black glass, so still that it almost erased the sense of motion. It was a strange illusion, the ship moving through the world, yet feeling utterly still. Sometimes, one of the officers would look out for a long time, eyes searching for a landmark that didn't exist. All they saw was the reflection of the stars trembling on the water. The captain had already retired to his cabin, leaving the bridge to his officers. There was no reason to worry. They had sailed through calmer nights and colder seas before. The Titanic was new, strong, perfect in every detail. Its engines hummed softly, its lights glowed warm against the dark. The Atlantic felt peaceful, a vast, sleeping ocean with no voice to warn them. Take a breath and imagine standing there with them. The slow rhythm of the ship beneath your feet. The faint vibration in your chest as the engines turned far below. The quiet creak of the ship's frame stretching against the cold. Even in such stillness, there was life, the steady pulse of a machine that believed it could outlast the night. Below the bridge, a few sailors walked their rounds, lanterns in hand. Their light flickered across polished railings and dark windows, swaying with each step. One of them paused to listen. The faint hum, the steady churn of water, the whisper of wind. It was hypnotic, almost soothing. He smiled faintly, not knowing he was listening to history's calmest hour. Inside the chart room, lines of ink traced their path across the Atlantic. The officers checked the coordinates with practiced precision, marking progress every few minutes. The instruments worked perfectly. The weather report showed nothing unusual. A few ships nearby had sent wireless messages warning of ice, but nothing urgent. At sea, warnings were routine, and this night felt too calm to break that rhythm. A soft reminder drifts in, like the sound of the ocean outside. Everything still feels peaceful. The ship glides forward as it always has, without effort, without pause. Each man on duty carries out his role with quiet trust. There's beauty in that discipline, in that calm focus that fills the long hours between midnight and dawn. And as the bridge remains still, bathed in lamplight and silence, the Titanic continues her graceful journey across the stars reflected on the sea. The men on watch breathe the same cold air, steady and sure, believing that dawn will come just as it always does, slow, golden, and certain. The minutes passed softly. Inside the bridge, the ticking of the clock was the only sound that measured time. Each second felt gentle, stretching like ripples across still water. The officers continued their quiet work, checking instruments, scanning the horizon, adjusting their bearings. Everything was smooth, almost effortless. It was a kind of calm that could make a person forget they were surrounded by a vast and unpredictable ocean. Above them, the crow's nest stood silent, small figures keeping watch under the stars. Murdoch occasionally glanced upward, though there was no reason for concern. The ship had been built to handle anything. Its name itself carried confidence, Titanic, as if even the ocean respected its strength. None of them doubted it, not even for a moment. Take another breath, slow and steady. Feel the calm rhythm of this moment. It's the kind of peace that arrives only in silence. No wind, no waves, no motion except the steady pulse of a ship that believes it will live forever. In that illusion, there's comfort, and in that comfort, the story lingers a little longer. Inside the wheelhouse, one of the junior officers adjusted a gauge, his fingers stiff from the cold. He smiled faintly, proud of the precision of the instruments, unaware of how fragile that control really was. The bridge smelled faintly of metal, salt, and warm oil, a scent of confidence. The great ship moved forward, unaware that the ocean beneath was changing. A wireless message arrived just before midnight, another ice warning from a nearby vessel. The radio operator placed it on the desk, among other notes, to be read in the morning. There was no urgency, no alarm. The ship's path was clear, the night too calm to raise concern. The message lay quietly on the desk, its ink drying under the glow of the lamp. In the distance, a soft glimmer of ice might have been visible if the moon had been full. But without it, the world remained black, endless, and still. The officers stared into that darkness without worry. For them, it was just another night, another smooth passage through calm waters. The hum of the engines below remained the same, unbroken and sure. A gentle reminder returns. Everything feels peaceful now. The calm is real, deep, and steady. The bridge glows like a small island of light in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by an ocean of darkness. For the men awake at this hour, this was not a dangerous place. It was simply home, for one more hour, before history changed forever. And as the ship sailed on, the stars above held their quiet watch. The officers stood calmly at their stations, unaware that the world was shifting beneath them. The calm command continued, graceful and still, guiding the ship through what seemed like eternity, unaware that the stillness of this night was only the pause before the first sound of fate. Below the shining decks of the Titanic, far from the soft lamps and polished brass, another world stirred in dim light and warmth. The lower decks were alive with the quiet hum of machinery and the faint rhythm of engines pulsing through the metal walls. The air was thick with coal dust, heat, and the scent of oil. It was not a grand place, but it felt safe, a world of workers, laughter, and duty wrapped in the heartbeat of the ship. In the quarters of the crew, the atmosphere was calmer now. The long shifts had ended for some, and the narrow bunks were filled with men resting in their uniforms. A few still talked softly, their voices muffled by the low ceiling. Someone hummed a tune from home, half asleep, the melody swaying gently with the motion of the ship. It was an ordinary night, and that made it beautiful. One young steward sat on his bunk, reading a letter by the flicker of a lantern. The handwriting was uneven, perhaps from a child or someone unaccustomed to writing. He smiled faintly, running his thumb across the paper before folding it carefully and slipping it back into his pocket. For him, this was a moment of peace, a brief pause between work and sleep. Not far away, in the boiler rooms, a few stokers were still at work, finishing the final rounds before rest. The sound of shovels scraping against the coal floor echoed like a slow, steady drumbeat. Their bodies moved with practiced rhythm, tired but sure. Each breath they took was heavy with heat and smoke, but it was their world, one they knew well. Above them, faint vibrations told them the ship was still moving smoothly. The Titanic was alive in every sound, the hiss of steam, the creak of pipes, the low hum of energy running through its veins. To those below, it was like living inside a giant, breathing creature. They trusted its strength, its rhythm, its constancy. It had never failed them, not once. Take a slow breath here, with them. Feel the heat of the room, the closeness of the air, the quiet comfort of men who have done their work and are finally at rest. There's something deeply human in this moment, the kind of peace that comes not from silence, but from exhaustion. A simple, honest kind of calm. In the storage areas, others worked quietly under the glow of hanging lamps. The flickering light cast long shadows across crates and barrels. Each sound, a footstep, a latch closing, echoed softly in the metal corridors. Somewhere, water dripped rhythmically from a pipe, steady as a clock. To the men below deck, that rhythm was the sound of home. A few sailors shared a joke as they passed by, their laughter brief but genuine. It echoed through the narrow halls, breaking the monotony for just a moment before fading back into quiet. For them, the ship wasn't a luxury liner. It was a living space, a home away from land, filled with faces they trusted and routines they understood. Down one long corridor, the air grew cooler. The electric lights buzzed faintly, their glow soft and uneven. A man walked slowly past a line of closed doors, counting them out of habit. Each one represented someone resting, someone breathing, someone dreaming of home. It was peaceful, not because the world outside was kind, but because inside there was still warmth and order. And as the hours passed, the great ship continued forward, steady and calm. Those below could feel its pulse through the walls, that deep vibration that lulled them toward sleep. For a brief time, everything in their world was balanced, the work done, the air warm, the night unbroken. The storm of history was still far away, waiting beyond the stars. In one of the narrow hallways, a lamp flickered gently as a steward walked by, closing cabin doors one by one. His footsteps were soft, almost respectful, as if he didn't want to disturb the sleeping men. The air smelled faintly of soap, leather, and warm metal. Somewhere in the distance, a pipe hissed softly, a familiar sound that meant the engines were still steady. To him, that sound was comfort. It meant everything was fine. Not far away, a few stokers sat together on overturned crates, finishing the last of their tea before heading to rest. The tea was weak and lukewarm, but it didn't matter. They laughed about the same things they always did, how the ship's endless corridors could confuse even the crew, how the ocean looked like glass that night. Their laughter echoed briefly through the iron walls, disappearing into the steady hum of the ship's heart. Further down, a carpenter leaned against a bulkhead, taking a moment to listen. The vibration of the engines was steady, but beneath it, there was another rhythm, quieter, slower. He smiled, realizing it was just the water brushing gently against the hull. To most, it was nothing, but to him, it was like the ocean whispering, reminding them of where they were, small travelers in a vast and silent sea. Take a breath with him. Let that quiet settle in. The sound of work fading into rest. The feeling of safety that comes from being surrounded by familiar sounds. For the men below, the ship was their entire world. The idea that anything could go wrong was so distant it didn't exist at all. They had earned their rest, and for now, that was enough. In the mailroom, two clerks worked late, sorting through stacks of letters. The papers rustled softly as they were organized by destination. London, New York, Paris. They didn't speak much. The work was soothing, mechanical, even peaceful. Each envelope carried a message, a piece of someone's life, heading toward a future that felt certain. The men smiled quietly, unaware that their careful work would soon be lost to the depths. In another compartment, the hum of the ship grew softer, muffled by distance. A few sailors lay in their bunks, eyes half open, listening to the rhythmic sound of the propellers far below. The sound was hypnotic, a deep, continuous thrum that filled the body more than the ear. It was a lullaby made of steel and sea. Many fell asleep to it every night, trusting that rhythm completely. A soft reminder drifts through. You're safe, and so were they, at least for now. The stillness of this night feels endless, suspended in time. Every sound, every breath, feels like part of a slow dream. The Titanic's heart beats strong, and the people inside rest in its warmth, wrapped in quiet faith that morning will come. In a storage room near the bow, a man checked the temperature gauges before turning in. His lantern cast long shadows across the walls. He paused for a moment, listening to the stillness around him. Nothing stirred except the faint hum of machinery. He closed the door gently and walked away, leaving the space in complete peace, unaware that the ocean outside had already begun to change. Down the hallway, a few lights were dimmed to save power. The glow softened until it looked almost like candlelight. A steward passed by, carrying blankets for the early morning shift. His footsteps were slow, tired, calm. He glanced at his watch, noting the time, nearly midnight. Just another night at sea, he thought. Just another routine, unchanged and endless. And as the crew settled deeper into sleep, the great ship continued her steady glide through the dark. The ocean was silent, the sky clear, and the stars watched from above. No one in those lower decks felt fear or worry. Only warmth, exhaustion, and trust. It was peace, a fragile peace held in the quiet hum of engines and the slow rhythm of dreams. The clock neared midnight. The Titanic moved through the Atlantic like a living shadow, its lights gliding silently across the black water. The air had turned colder, so cold that each breath became a soft cloud before fading into nothing. The stars above were sharp and endless, the kind of clarity that almost didn't feel real. Everything was so calm, so perfectly still, that even the ocean seemed to be holding its breath. Up in the crow's nest, the two lookouts stood alert, eyes straining against the darkness. Their scarves fluttered gently in the wind as they scanned the horizon. No moon, no light, just the faint shimmer of stars on the surface of the sea. It was beautiful, but in that beauty, There was something uneasy, a sense that the night was too perfect, too quiet, as if the world had forgotten to move. They shifted from one foot to another, trying to stay warm. Frost had formed along the railings, and every surface seemed to glisten faintly under the starlight. Their binoculars were cold to the touch, the metal biting against their gloves. They searched again and again, tracing the black line where the sky met the water, but nothing broke the horizon. Just stars, stars, and more stars. Far below, the officers on the bridge continued their steady routine. The ship's course was unchanged. The compass gleamed softly in the lamplight, and the faint ticking of the clock echoed through the silence. The telegraph clicked once, a simple confirmation from the engine room. All was well. The night remained undisturbed. The world was calm. Then, at 11:39 p.m., something changed. A faint blur appeared ahead, pale, almost invisible at first. The lookout blinked, unsure if it was a trick of the light. The sea had no texture, no reflection, just a smooth sheet of black glass. But in that darkness, a shape began to form, a shadow lighter than the rest, something too still, too solid. His heartbeat quickened. He leaned forward, breath fogging the air. For a moment, he said nothing. The sound of his own breathing was all he could hear. Then, instinct overrode hesitation. He rang the bell 3 times, sharp, urgent, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "Iceberg, right ahead." The words left his mouth and vanished into the cold wind, reaching the bridge a second later through the voice tube. On the bridge, First Officer Murdoch reacted instantly. His eyes flicked toward the horizon, and though he couldn't see it yet, he trusted the call. "Hard to starboard," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. The helmsman's hands moved quickly, spinning the great wheel. The telegraph clanged, engines reversed. The steel giant began to turn, slow and deliberate. Take a breath. Even now, the night remains quiet. No one screams, no chaos, just movement, the sound of machinery shifting deep within the ship. The great Titanic leaned slightly, turning through the calm water. The iceberg loomed closer, ghost-like, glowing faintly blue against the starlight. For a brief moment, it looked like something carved from the sky itself, still, beautiful, silent. The officers on the bridge stood in tense focus. Every second felt stretched thin, every sound magnified. The engines throbbed beneath their feet, reversing against the momentum of millions of tons of steel. They could feel the vibration through the floor, through their bones. The ship was moving, but would it be enough? Down below, no one yet knew what was happening. The stokers kept their rhythm. The stewards slept soundly. The hum of the engines was steady, though it began to change, a subtle shift, a slowing pulse. Somewhere far below, a man looked up, noticing the new vibration, then shrugged and returned to his work. Above them all, history was beginning to turn its page. The ship turned, but not fast enough. From the crow's nest, the iceberg seemed to swell in size, silent, motionless, vast. Its pale surface shimmered faintly under the stars, like a wall of frozen light rising out of the ocean. The lookouts held their breath as the bow of the Titanic began to shift, slow and graceful, the metal groaning softly under the strain. The sea made no sound. It was too calm for that. Only the deep, cold hush of inevitability. Then came a sound, not a crash, not an explosion, but a long, low scrape, like a sigh against the hull. It started at the bow and traveled down the length of the ship, a shiver through the steel. The men on the bridge felt it under their feet, a vibration so faint it might have been imagined. But the lookouts knew. They could see the ice shearing off, sparkling like crushed glass as it slid along the side. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence returned as if nothing had happened. The iceberg drifted back into the darkness, unbothered, disappearing as quietly as it had appeared. Only the ship carried the memory of that sound, a tremor deep within, echoing through its endless corridors. The sea remained calm, almost indifferent, as if pretending nothing had changed. Murdoch's voice was quiet but firm. "Stop engines." The telegraph rang again, and the ship began to slow. The vibrations eased into a deep hum. The officers exchanged glances, calm but uncertain. No alarms, no cries, only questions that hung in the air, unanswered. One of them stepped to the window, peering into the night. The sea looked empty again, perfectly still. Below deck, a few crewmen had felt the tremor too. A soft jolt, a faint noise, something out of rhythm. In the mailroom, one of the clerks looked up from his stack of letters, frowning. "Did you feel that?" he asked. His partner nodded slowly, listening to the hum beneath their feet. Then, as the sound steadied, they shrugged and returned to work. The ship felt too big, too strong, to be harmed by something so small. Take a gentle breath. The calm still lingers. No one runs, no one panics. The story moves quietly, like the ocean itself. The great ship drifts through the water, unaware that the wound has already begun to spread deep within its hull. Above deck, the stars remain unmoved, silent witnesses to a moment that will echo through time. In the boiler rooms, the stokers continued feeding the fires. The heat roared, the air thick with smoke and steam. They didn't know the sea was beginning to creep through the lowest compartments, silent and cold. The water flowed in softly, like breath-filling lungs, invisible beneath the sounds of work. The men shoveled on, keeping the engines alive. On the bridge, the captain arrived within minutes, his coat buttoned tight, his voice calm. "What have we struck?" he asked. Murdoch answered quietly, "An iceberg, sir." They exchanged no panic, only professionalism. Orders were given quickly, precisely. The tone remained steady, but in the captain's eyes, a shadow of worry flickered, faint but real. The ship slowed to a crawl. The engines groaned, then quieted. In that sudden stillness, the world felt heavier. The sound of the sea against the hull was faint, but different, softer, uneven. The officers leaned forward, listening. Somewhere below, metal bent and shifted, unseen but certain. The calm remained, but it was the kind of calm that hides the truth. And as the ship drifted to a stop, the stars above remained bright and indifferent. The iceberg was gone, swallowed by the night. The men on deck looked out across the empty horizon, seeing nothing, hearing nothing. For a moment, it was as if time had paused. But deep below, the ocean had already begun its quiet work, one compartment at a time. The Titanic's fate had arrived not with thunder, but with a whisper. The sound faded almost as soon as it began. A faint vibration shuddered through the hull, then vanished into the deep hum of the engines. Most people aboard never noticed it. To them, it might have felt like a gentle bump, a dream half remembered between breaths. Above deck, the night remained calm, windless, serene, the stars unchanged, the sea perfectly still. On the bridge, the officers waited, listening to the silence that followed. Their eyes met in quiet uncertainty. There was no sound of rushing water, no cries, no chaos. Only the soft ticking of the clock, the steady creak of the deck beneath their boots. It was as if the ship itself was thinking, listening to what had just happened. A few moments later, the captain stepped forward, his tone calm but sharp. "Close the watertight doors." The order echoed down into the heart of the ship. Deep below, levers were pulled, steel doors slid shut, and the faint clang of metal reverberated through the lower decks. It was a sound meant for safety, a sound that promised control. In the mailroom, the clerks heard it too. The walls trembled lightly, and one of the men paused mid-motion. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His partner nodded, uncertain. "Probably nothing," he said, returning to his letters. They didn't know that just beyond the wall, cold water had begun to pour in, slow at first, almost polite, then faster, finding every gap, every seam. Down in the boiler rooms, the stokers felt it next. A sudden burst of cold air brushed against the heat. One of them turned toward the noise, frowning. Water, dark, heavy, was beginning to spill across the floor. They froze for a moment, confused. Then came the shout, not of panic, but but of command. Get back. Shut the dampers. The room filled with echoes of boots and metal, but the water didn't stop. It kept coming. Above them, life remained strangely normal. A few passengers in the lower corridors stepped out of their cabins, robes tied loosely, curious about the faint jolt they'd felt. Some smiled, some joked. "We must have hit a wave," someone said. The air smelled faintly of salt and metal, but no one thought much of it. They returned to bed, unaware that the clock had already begun its quiet countdown. On the bridge, reports began to arrive, brief, factual, calm. Flooding in the forward compartments. Pumps running. The captain listened without expression, his hand resting on the railing. He didn't raise his voice. "Send the carpenter," he said quietly. "Have him sound the ship." The carpenter nodded and disappeared into the lower decks, lantern swinging. Take a slow breath. The silence after impact feels strange, like a pause between heartbeats. The sea remains calm, the air cold, the stars bright and distant. But beneath that stillness, the ocean is at work, patient, unstoppable. It doesn't rage or roar. It seeps. It whispers. It fills the spaces where sound can't reach. The men in the engine room could hear it now, the dull rush of water striking metal. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking gauges, adjusting valves. No shouting, no panic. Just calm professionalism. It was their nature to fix problems, not fear them. But as they looked toward the flooding section, even they felt it, a small flicker of unease. Far above, on the upper decks, nothing had changed. A few passengers lingered near the railings, wrapped in coats against the cold. The night was so peaceful that it almost erased the idea of danger. The engines had slowed, but no one seemed to notice. Some pointed to the stars, marveling at how clear the sky was. The ocean stretched endlessly, silent and smooth, hiding its secret below. In the captain's cabin, charts were spread across the table. Officers spoke in quiet tones, measuring, estimating, calculating. The carpenter returned with his report. 5 compartments flooded. 5. The room fell silent for a moment, the number hanging heavy in the air. The captain exhaled slowly. "She can stay afloat with 4, he said softly. "Not 5. Still, there was no chaos, no shouting. Orders were calm, voices steady. Lights remained bright. The ship seemed unchanged. But beneath the surface, the truth was already moving too fast to stop. The sea had found its path, and it followed it without sound or mercy. A reminder drifts in. Everything above remains calm. If you stood on deck, you'd never know the ship was wounded. The music had not yet stopped, the air was still, and the world carried on as though nothing had happened. It's the strange kind of peace that comes right before the world shifts forever. Down in the mailroom, the clerks tried to lift the sacks of letters away from the water, but it was rising too quickly. Their shoes splashed as they worked. One looked toward the door, waiting for help that didn't come. The lamps flickered against the damp air. The sound of dripping water filled the silence, steady, quiet, almost peaceful. And while the ship's officers discussed their next move, the Titanic continued forward, though slower now. The sea pressed against her sides, whispering its cold truth. Above, the stars gleamed like nothing had changed. But inside, in the narrow metal corridors, history had begun to shift, quietly, invisibly, like a secret carried on the breath of the ocean. The officers began to move with measured calm. Orders were given quietly, passed down the chain without urgency. The ship's designers had promised it was unsinkable, and even now, most men believe that. The Titanic was too large, too strong, too perfectly built to fail. No one imagined that nature had already written another ending for this night. In the wireless room, the operators tapped out messages, fingers light against the keys. At first, they sent only routine signals, updates, positions, short exchanges with nearby ships. The air buzzed faintly with Morse code. There was no distress call yet, only conversation. Outside, the faint hum of electricity was swallowed by the endless quiet of the ocean. In the lower decks, the truth grew heavier. The water was rising fast, slipping under doors and around machinery. The men there worked with purpose, moving crates, shutting valves, closing hatches. The sound of rushing water grew louder, no longer a whisper but a steady roar that filled the corridors. Still, no panic. Just effort. Just time slipping through their hands. A few crewmen ran upstairs to report what they'd seen. Their boots echoed on the metal steps. One man stopped halfway, turning back for a second, as if part of him wanted to make sure it wasn't real. But the cold spray on his face told him otherwise. The sea was inside now, and it wasn't leaving. Up on the bridge, the captain's face remained calm, but his eyes were distant. He listened to each report with quiet attention, nodding slowly. The officers stood waiting for orders that didn't come right away. It was a moment of stillness, the kind of silence where everyone knows what it means, but no one dares to say it aloud. The captain finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Prepare the boats." Take a deep breath. The calm remains, the voice is low, the air cold, the sea unmoved. The Titanic has not begun to tilt yet. The deck is still level, the stars still sharp above. It feels like time is stretching, holding its breath before letting go. For the passengers asleep in their cabins, nothing has changed. The story above remains peaceful, unaware of what grows below. In the third-class corridors, a few passengers stirred. They heard the faint hum of voices, the sound of boots overhead. Some opened their doors, blinking into the light, confused but curious. The air felt colder now, though they didn't know why. One man smiled faintly. "Just a small bump," he said to his children, pulling the blanket back over them. "Go back to sleep." The water reached the mailroom ceiling. Sacks of letters floated in silence, paper swirling slowly in the rising flood. The clerks had vanished, called to help elsewhere. Only the sound of dripping and the gentle slap of water against the walls remained. In that strange quiet, the world's memories, messages, stories, names, drifted weightless for the last time. In the engine room, steam hissed as valves were shut. Men worked shoulder to shoulder, sweat and seawater mixing on their skin. They knew the truth now, though none spoke it. Their job was simple: keep the lights burning, keep the power flowing. They did not argue. They simply worked. In their silence, there was courage, a calm, human kind of courage. Far below, the water pressed harder. It moved through corridors and storage rooms, filling spaces that had always been dry. Each new sound, a groan of metal, a hiss of air, was swallowed quickly by the deep. The ship still floated proudly above, her lights golden and steady. But her heart was changing. Slowly, she was becoming part of the sea. A passenger on one of the upper decks stepped out for air, wrapped in a coat. He noticed the stars reflected in the water and smiled at the beauty of it. The air felt sharper now, colder than before. He didn't know that the temperature had dropped because the ocean was beginning to claim its own warmth back. He took a deep breath, looked once more at the horizon, and returned inside. In the officers' quarters, someone poured a cup of tea that went untouched. The captain leaned against the railing, staring into the dark. Behind him, footsteps moved quickly but quietly, each man knowing his place. The bridge still glowed softly, lamps burning steady, like candles refusing to die. Below, one last door closed against the flood. The sound echoed up the passage like a sigh, the ship exhaling. In that moment, the Titanic was both alive and dying, still majestic, still proud, but quietly surrendering to the inevitable. The ocean made no noise. It needed none. And as the last of the calm lingered, the stars above shone brighter than ever. No one screamed. No one knew. The world was still beautiful, still silent, still unaware that within this peace, history had already begun to fall asleep forever beneath the waves. The first minutes after the truth settled in were not filled with chaos. They were filled with movement. Calm, steady, disciplined movement. Orders began to spread quietly through the ship. Crewmen walked briskly down corridors, knocking on doors, guiding one another with quiet voices. The air had changed. There was no panic yet, only the heavy awareness of what needed to be done. In the lower decks, the engineers stayed at their posts. The water was rising quickly now, filling the compartments one by one, but they didn't run. Their hands moved over levers and gauges, turning valves, adjusting the flow of steam. The heat was unbearable, yet they continued. Every second they kept the engines running meant one more second of light for those above. They knew what it meant. They stayed anyway. Up on deck, stewards began to wake the passengers gently, knocking softly, speaking in calm tones. "Just a precaution," they said. "Please dress warmly and come to the boat deck." Their faces showed no fear, though their eyes flickered with urgency. It was their job to keep others calm, and they did it with grace. For many, it was the first sign that something was truly wrong. The cold air outside bit at the skin as passengers stepped onto the deck. The stars above were dazzling, and the sea lay still, as if frozen in time. The lights of the ship reflected faintly on the surface, creating a soft halo of gold around her hull. The illusion of safety was still strong, even as the bow dipped a little lower. The band had not yet begun to play, but the air already carried the weight of unspoken courage. In the wireless room, the operators worked tirelessly. Their hands moved with speed and precision, tapping out the first distress calls: "CQD, come quick, danger." The signals cut through the night, reaching ships scattered across the Atlantic. For a brief moment, their spark bridged the silence of the sea. Hope traveled in those signals, small bursts of light carried by invisible waves. Take a breath. The air on the deck is sharp, cold, still. Around you, voices murmur softly, boots thud against the wooden planks, and the faint hum of the engines continues below. It is not panic. It is purpose. The crew moves with quiet dignity, each man doing his part without question, guided by training, duty, and something deeper, humanity. Somewhere below deck, the band gathered their instruments. They didn't wait for orders. The musicians understood what was needed: calm. They tuned their violins, warmed their fingers, and began to play softly. The first notes were simple, slow, comforting. Music meant not to entertain, but to steady hearts. It floated through the cold air like a whisper of hope. On the bridge, the captain remained composed. His presence carried a stillness that steadied the men around him. He spoke sparingly, his words precise and clear. The officers obeyed without hesitation. Lanterns swung in the breeze, shadows stretched across the floor, and time seemed to move differently, slower, heavier. Every order mattered now. Every movement was sacred. Farther down, the stokers continued their work even as the water reached their knees. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, the heat mixing with the icy air. The men shouted to one another through the noise, their voices firm, not frantic. "Keep it going," someone yelled. "Hold it steady." The light above them flickered but did not die. They were keeping the ship alive, even as the ocean claimed her piece by piece. The stewards on the upper decks moved from cabin to cabin, guiding passengers toward safety. Some smiled as they reassured others. Some carried children, wrapped in blankets. Others stood near the lifeboats, securing ropes, checking supplies. They worked quickly but gently, as if the act of care itself could hold back fear. Their calm became the light others followed. A soft reminder drifts through the night: duty is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just a man doing his work when the world begins to fall apart around him. That kind of courage doesn't shout, it whispers. And on this night, the ship was full of those whispers, filling every corridor and deck with quiet strength. In one corridor, a group of stewards paused for a brief moment, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. They knew what was happening. They knew the odds. But they kept going, because that was what was right. Their boots splashed through shallow water now, yet they still smiled as they guided families upward. On the upper deck, an officer raised his voice, not to command, but to reassure. "Plenty of time," he said, his tone calm, his face unreadable. Around him, The air glittered with frost. Passengers huddled in coats, their breath visible in the cold. The sound of the band's music carried faintly across the deck, weaving between the voices like a lullaby for courage. Down in the galley, a cook stayed behind, helping pass out bread and biscuits to those heading topside. He said nothing, only smiled as he handed the food over. It was his way of helping, of being useful when words felt too small. Every act, no matter how simple, became a way of saying, "We will face this with grace." And through it all, the ship continued to glow. Her light shone against the darkness, warm and golden, a fragile defiance against the cold sea. For every person aboard, the night had changed, but duty remained. It became the quiet thread that held them together, the final gift they could give before the ocean took its turn to speak. The lifeboats were being uncovered now, the sound of ropes and wooden beams creaking in the cold. Officers moved carefully, giving instructions in calm voices. Women and children first. The words carried through the air, not as an order shouted, but as a steady rhythm of care. The crew worked swiftly but gently, their movements precise under the glow of the deck lights. Every second mattered, yet the calm remained unbroken. Nearby, a group of sailors helped passengers into the boats. Their breath came in soft clouds, faces pale from the cold, hands trembling only from the frost. Some women hesitated, looking back toward the glowing warmth of the ship. A steward bowed slightly, his voice soft and steady. "You'll be all right, miss. Just step in carefully." His words were kindness disguised as instruction, the kind that makes courage possible. The band continued to play. Their music drifted over the deck, weaving through the whispers and quiet cries. It was not loud, not grand, just soft, human, and heartbreakingly calm. The melody mixed with the sound of water brushing against the hull, creating something almost sacred. Those who listened found comfort in it, even if only for a moment. Below deck, the engineers kept the power alive. Water now reached their waists, but they stayed at their posts, guiding valves, keeping the pressure steady. The light they kept burning allowed the crew above to see, to work, to save lives. They knew what it cost, and they accepted it without a word. There was no audience to their courage, only the quiet hum of engines and the rising tide. Take a breath with them. The air feels colder now, sharper, thinner. The night sky above is endless, yet close. Around the ship, the Atlantic stretches silent and indifferent. Still, the Titanic glows like a floating lantern in the dark. Her crew continues their work, their final act of devotion. Every motion, every breath, becomes a quiet form of prayer without words. On the promenade deck, a young steward guided an elderly couple toward the boats. The woman clutched his arm, whispering that she didn't want to leave her husband. He looked down, his expression kind but firm. "You must go now," he said gently. "He'll follow soon." He helped her step in, then turned back to steady her husband's shoulder. Their eyes met, a brief exchange of trust between strangers. In the wireless room, sparks still flickered. The operators sent one final message after another, their fingers stiff from the cold. The air smelled faintly of burning dust and electricity. They had already been told they could stop, but they didn't. "Keep sending," one said quietly, "just in case someone hears us." It wasn't hope, it was duty. Farther down, the cooks finished their work, now distributing any food they could find: apples, biscuits, anything warm. A few of them stayed to help tie ropes or hold lanterns. One man laughed softly at the absurdity of it, serving food while the ship slowly tilted. The sound was brief but human, the kind of laughter that hides fear behind kindness. A soft reminder lingers, they are still calm. The world around them might be unraveling, but their hands remain steady. The ship still glows, and the night is still beautiful in its cold silence. Even as the bow dips lower, the spirit of the people aboard does not falter. There is no shouting, no chaos, only the quiet sound of courage. On the upper deck, a group of crewmen stood together, watching as lifeboats descended into the dark water. Their faces were illuminated by the golden lamps, eyes reflecting both exhaustion and peace. One of them whispered, "It's strange, so quiet." The others nodded. They didn't speak again. Words felt too heavy for a night like this. Inside, the stewards continued checking rooms, making sure no one was left behind. They walked through corridors where the lights flickered and water pooled along the floors. They called out softly, "Is anyone there?" Some voices answered, others did not. Still, they moved forward. To them, the duty wasn't to save everyone. It was to try, no matter the outcome. On the bridge, the captain stood motionless for a moment, looking out into the black horizon. His hat was gone, his hair caught in the wind. Around him, the officers worked with quiet precision, preparing the final lifeboats. He didn't need to speak. His silence was enough. Everyone around him understood. The ship was dying, but their purpose remained. Below, the engineers were still at their posts. The lights flickered above them, shadows dancing across their faces. One man glanced up, smiled faintly, and said, "We'll keep her shining, lads." They all nodded, and the sound of shovels striking coal continued, steady, rhythmic, defiant. It was a song made of fire and faith in the middle of the sea. As the water crept higher, the Titanic leaned gently to one side. Dishes slid from shelves, chairs tipped, and yet the calm held. The band continued to play. The crew continued to work. No one fled. It was as if the ship itself demanded grace in her final hours, and her people honored that request with every breath they had left. And as the lifeboats floated farther from the hull, those who remained stood along the rails, their faces lit by the fading glow of the ship's lamps. The air was silent now. No engines, no orders, only the soft music drifting into the night. Duty had become their comfort, their final act of dignity. The great ship shone for a few moments more, a golden light in an endless sea. The night had grown colder, sharper. The wind carried a soft hum, the kind that belongs only to wide, empty oceans. The great Titanic leaned slightly now, almost imperceptibly, but those who were awake could feel it. The tilt was small, subtle, but it spoke of something final. The stars above still burned bright, perfectly still, as if refusing to acknowledge what was unfolding below them. The deck was quieter than before. The sounds of ropes, footsteps, and distant voices drifted into the open air. The lifeboats were mostly gone now, small silhouettes vanishing into the dark water. Their oars moved gently, the ripples spreading out in circles that glimmered in the starlight. Those left on board watched them fade, not with fear, but with a kind of soft acceptance. The time for disbelief had passed. The band continued to play. Their fingers were numb, but they didn't stop. The music had changed, slower now, more reflective, like a prayer without words. The melody moved across the deck, through the corridors, into the hearts of those still standing. It wrapped around the ship like a final embrace, reminding everyone that even in the cold, there could still be warmth. Near the grand staircase, a few stewards stood quietly, their uniforms damp from the mist. They helped where they could, offering blankets, helping people steady their footing, guiding the lost toward higher decks. None of them raised their voices. They spoke in low, gentle tones, and when there were no more tasks left, they simply stood together in silence, watching the glow of the chandeliers tremble with the tilt of the ship. In the engine rooms, the men worked in darkness broken only by the red glow of the furnaces. Water reached their waists now, but still they stayed. The heat and the cold clashed around them, steam against seawater. The sound was deafening, but their focus never wavered. "Hold her steady," one called. "As long as the lights are burning, she lives." It wasn't hope that kept them, it was devotion. Take a deep breath. You can almost hear it, the low hum of the ship's heart, the echo of footsteps on tilting floors, the faint cry of the wind through the rigging. There's no chaos, no shouting, only the rhythm of people doing what they can, what they must, even as the sea slowly claims its prize. On the upper decks, passengers gathered in small groups. Some prayed quietly. Others held hands, not speaking at all. A few looked toward the lifeboats disappearing in the distance, the lamps bobbing faintly like floating stars. Between them, the ocean stretched endlessly, swallowing every sound into stillness. The captain walked slowly along the bridge, his expression calm. He paused near the wheel, touching it lightly, as though reassuring himself that everything was still in order. Around him, the officers moved with quiet determination, guiding the remaining crew, helping those who lingered. Their faces were pale, but their actions steady. They were men who had accepted their fate without surrendering their composure. Inside the wireless room, sparks flickered for the last time. The operator's hands trembled, but they kept sending messages until the end. Come quickly, they tapped into the dark. The sound of the key grew faint as the ship's power began to fade. Then, finally, silence. The soft hum of electricity stopped, leaving only the whisper of the ocean outside. Down below, one engineer looked up as the lights flickered. The water had reached the boilers now. He smiled faintly, muttering a quiet prayer under his breath. Then he turned one last valve, his movements slow, deliberate, precise. The glow from the furnaces dimmed, but the warmth lingered a moment longer, as if refusing to leave before him. A soft reminder drifts in. Even now, the night is peaceful. The ship tilts further, yes, but the stars above remain clear. The ocean, indifferent and vast, reflects the golden light of the Titanic's lamps. The music still plays, softer, slower, each note dissolving into the cold air like breath. The world is ending quietly, beautifully, with grace. Near the bow, a small group of men knelt together, speaking in whispers. They didn't pray aloud. Their words were personal, carried off by the wind before they could finish. Above them, the lights flickered once more, and the sea glittered like glass. The ship's shadow stretched across the water, a fading reflection of something once thought unbreakable. A steward helped a young man fasten a life jacket, then smiled faintly. "Stay calm," he said. "Keep your eyes on the stars." The young man nodded, clutching the jacket tight. It wasn't courage, not really. It was something simpler. Acceptance. The kind that settles over a person when fear has nowhere left to go. And as the band reached the final bars of their song, the ship seemed to listen. The sound drifted upward into the night, mingling with the hum of the wind. The officers on the bridge paused to hear it. The passengers stilled. The sea held its breath. The music became part of the air, a lullaby for those who would sleep forever beneath the waves. The tilt of the deck grew steeper, but the calm never left. The sea lapped higher against the hull, rising quietly as if in slow motion. The wind carried a deep chill now, one that stung the skin and filled the lungs like ice. Yet still, there was music. Still, there were voices, gentle, composed, human. The great ship glowed faintly under the stars, a final lantern drifting on an endless sea. On the promenade deck, a group of officers worked together to lower the last lifeboat. The ropes strained and creaked, groaning against the weight. A few passengers hesitated to step in, choosing instead to stay near the railings, unwilling to leave what felt like home. One man said softly, "It doesn't feel real." Another nodded. "No, it feels like the world's holding its breath." They were right. The air was thick with silence. Inside, the grand staircase shimmered in flickering light. Water seeped slowly across the carpet, glinting like silver under the chandeliers. The sound of dripping echoed down the hall, rhythmic, patient. A steward stood at the top of the stairs, watching for any remaining passengers. There were none. Still, he waited, because that was his duty. Far below, the engineers stood ankle-deep in water. They had done everything possible. The lights flickered one last time, glowing a soft amber before dimming to gold. One man wiped his forehead with a trembling hand, smiled at his companions, and said, "That's it, boys." His voice was calm, even gentle. They nodded silently, knowing their work was done. Take a long, slow breath. Imagine that moment, the warmth fading, the hum silenced, yet everything still feels peaceful. There's no panic here, only stillness. Every person, every sound, Every breath is part of a shared rhythm, one that belongs to endings, but also to peace. The ocean surrounds them all, vast and eternal, reflecting the light that slowly fades away. On the deck, the band gathered closer together, their fingers stiff, their faces pale. The violinist looked at his instrument, then at the sea, and smiled faintly. He began a new song, one that every person aboard knew. Nearer, my God, to thee. The others joined softly, their music trembling in the cold. The melody rose into the night, quiet and pure, a hymn for courage and release. Some passengers listened, eyes closed. Some wept quietly, their tears freezing against their cheeks. Others stood in silence, hands clasped, faces turned upward toward the stars. For a moment, it felt as though the whole world had stopped, that even the sea was listening. The song carried across the dark water, far beyond the ship, into the endless horizon. On the bridge, the captain remained at his post. The water reached his boots now, dark and gleaming under the lantern light. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He looked out across the Atlantic, cold, vast, merciless, and exhaled slowly. His face was calm, lined not with fear but with acceptance. His ship had done all it could. Now it was time to let go. In the cold air, one of the surviving officers called out to those remaining. "Hold fast," he shouted, his voice breaking the stillness. But even that command carried gentleness, not panic. The sound of his words echoed against the steel, carried away by the wind. Around him, people braced themselves, clutching rails, holding one another, waiting. The music continued, growing softer with every note. The deck tilted further. The lights along the ship's length began to blink out, one by one, until only a few golden glows remained. The sound of the ocean grew louder now, a deep, low moan of water pressing against steel. The end was near, but it arrived slowly, like the fading of a long, beautiful dream. A soft reminder reaches you now. There is no chaos here, no screaming. Only the gentle hum of time moving forward. The men who stayed behind are quiet, steadfast. Their faces are pale, but their eyes are calm. The sea has become part of them, carrying their courage in silence. The story, even in its sadness, feels like rest. As the final minutes passed, the band's song faltered, not from fear, but from fatigue. Still, they played, each note thinner than the last, stretching into the air like breath in winter. The passengers near them listened, hands clasped tightly. The sound of the strings mixed with the wind, blending into something that no human ear could ever fully describe. Then, slowly, the ship's bow dipped beneath the surface. The cold water rose over the deck, swallowing light, swallowing sound. The stern lifted higher into the sky, silhouetted against the stars. For one suspended moment, the Titanic hung there, magnificent even in surrender. And then, with a sound that was not thunder, but a sigh, she began her final descent. The ocean accepted her quietly. The waves folded over her decks, her masts, her lights. The last flicker of gold disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only the reflection of stars on water. The music was gone, the voices silent. And in that stillness, the world was peaceful again. The sea had taken back its calm, wrapping it around the night like a blanket of silence. When the lights of the Titanic finally went out, the night did not roar, it whispered. The sea closed over the last gleam of gold and replaced it with the endless silver of starlight. For a moment, the Atlantic seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if it too understood the weight of what had just passed. Then came silence, vast, soft, infinite. The ocean was calm again, impossibly calm. The ripples from the ship's descent spread slowly, then disappeared into the darkness. There was no sound of splintering or rage, only the quiet rhythm of waves brushing against the cold air. Above, the stars shimmered as they always had, untouched by what had happened below. It was as though the heavens had chosen to remain still, keeping their peace while the world changed beneath them. The lifeboats floated nearby, scattered across the black surface. Their lanterns glowed faintly, tiny islands of light in an endless sea. The people inside sat wrapped in silence, too cold to speak, too stunned to weep. They looked toward the empty horizon, where moments ago the greatest ship ever built had stood. Now there was only water and stars. A man in one of the boats looked back toward the place where the ship had vanished. He whispered something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a name, and the sound vanished into the air. The sea did not answer. It never does. But his breath lingered, like a small offering to memory, carried by the wind. Far above, the constellations glowed brightly, the same as they had for centuries. They had watched kingdoms rise and fall, storms pass, and lives begin and end. Tonight, they watched again, silent witnesses to one of history's quietest tragedies. Yet their light felt gentle, almost comforting, as if the sky refused to let the darkness have the final word. Take a slow breath. Imagine yourself there, adrift beneath that sky. The water is still, the cold sharp but clean. Around you, the air is filled with the faint creak of oars, the whisper of waves, and the occasional murmur from another boat. There is sadness here, yes, but also peace. The kind of peace that only comes when the noise has faded and only reflection remains. In the distance, an officer spoke softly to those around him. His voice was steady, quiet. "We'll wait for dawn," he said. The words carried across the water like a promise, fragile but real. The survivors listened, their eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for light. The night stretched on, long and unbroken, but his words gave them something to hold on to. The sea beneath them was black glass. Every movement made small circles of light, reflections of stars bending and shivering on the surface. It was beautiful in its stillness, the kind of beauty that hurts to witness. The ocean had taken what it wanted, but in return, it left behind this haunting calm, an afterglow of silence that covered everything. In one of the lifeboats, a child stirred and asked softly, "Is it morning yet?" Her mother brushed her hair gently, her fingers stiff from the cold. "Not yet, love," she whispered. "But soon." Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. That promise of morning, of warmth, of light, became something sacred in the frozen dark. And as the night deepened, the survivors sat closer together, their breaths visible in the starlight. They shared blankets, small words, and quiet prayers. No one spoke of loss. No one spoke of fear. They simply existed, suspended between what had been and what would come. The sound of the ocean rocked them gently, as if trying to lull them to sleep. The hours after the sinking passed slowly, like time itself had grown heavy. The wind softened to a whisper, brushing over the waves as though to soothe them. The sea no longer raged, and the people no longer cried. Only quiet breaths, shallow and slow, filled the air. The night was endless, yet peaceful in a strange, sorrowful way. It was as if the ocean had wrapped everything, loss, courage, and love, into one long sigh. In the lifeboats, a few lanterns began to fade. Their flames trembled against the cold, shrinking lower with every gust of wind. The survivors huddled together, heads bowed, bodies pressed close. Some murmured quietly, others simply stared into the dark. The world around them was vast and silent, yet the closeness between them felt almost sacred, fragile human warmth beneath an eternal sky. Distant sounds carried across the water, the gentle splash of an oar, the soft creak of wood, the faint rustle of fabric in the wind. Each sound was small, but in the silence, it felt enormous. The sea had taken its part of the story, and what remained was memory, floating quietly, refusing to vanish. Above them, the first hint of dawn began to touch the horizon. A pale line of blue spread slowly across the sky. It was faint, hesitant, but real. The survivors lifted their heads toward it, eyes squinting against the dim light. For the first time in hours, the ocean seemed to breathe again. The stars began to fade, one by one, returning the sky to the morning. Take a slow breath. The night is ending now. The cold remains, but the silence begins to soften. The horizon glows faintly, not bright, not yet warm, but enough to remind the world that morning always follows. That even after the darkest hours, The earth still turns, and light still returns. A ship far away had seen the flares, had caught the faint call of the distress signals. It was coming, slow but steady, its smoke faint in the distance. The people in the lifeboats didn't cheer. They simply watched in silence, tears frozen on their faces, relief too deep for sound. The sea rocked them gently, as though carrying them toward salvation. In that early light, everything seemed unreal. The sky was pale gold, the water calm again. Where the Titanic had been, there was only a smooth, unbroken surface, no trace of the lights, no sound of the engines, no echo of her name. Just the calm sea and the soft rhythm of waves brushing against the sides of the boats. One sailor dipped his hand into the water, feeling its icy surface slide over his skin. He looked up at the brightening sky and whispered, "She's gone." His voice was quiet, respectful. It wasn't sorrow alone, it was awe, the kind that comes when you witness the end of something far greater than yourself. And yet, amid all that loss, there was still beauty. The rising sun painted the clouds with soft pink and silver. The air shimmered faintly, and the sea began to sparkle again. It felt as though the world was trying to comfort those who remained, to remind them that even in endings, there could still be peace. The ocean had taken what it must, but it gave back stillness, a quiet so deep it could cradle memory. The survivors looked toward the light, and in that moment, they became the storytellers of everyone who could no longer speak. The calm of the morning became their inheritance, the silence, their reminder. So now, as you rest, let that calm stay with you. Let the rhythm of the waves, the hush of the sea, and the gentle breath of morning lull you toward peace. The story of the Titanic may be one of loss, but also of grace, of people who face the end with dignity, courage, and stillness. And as you drift into sleep, know that even the darkest nights can carry light, and that silence, the same silence that followed the Titanic's last song, can sometimes be the most peaceful place in the world. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it has brought you calm, reflection, and rest. May your night be gentle, your dreams quiet, and your heart at ease. Good night.